right, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you so much. What a pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. My name is Jane Carpenter Rock, and I am acting director of, thank you, acting director of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And I am so pleased to welcome you all to this amazing evening, and we have a wonderful night in store. Before we begin the program, I want to acknowledge the rich Native communities that call Washington, D.C. home, and honor the Native peoples on whose ancestral lands we gather. I would also like to acknowledge and honor the enslaved individual whose labor built the historic building that houses this museum. Faith, courage, love. These are just some of the words that come to mind when I think of the innovative artist and human rights advocate, Glenn Kaino, and the remarkable athlete, Tommie Smith. So it is truly a joy to welcome so many friends and supporters to share in this magical evening. Tonight, we are celebrating Glenn Kaino and his remarkable installation, Bridge, which pays tribute to the groundbreaking legacy of Olympian Tommie Smith. We are celebrating the power of art to bring people together. For those who were able to join us last night for the screening of the wonderful film Withdrawn Arms, how many of you all were here last night? You will appreciate the amazing journey of faith, courage, and love that brought these two men together to create Bridge, and we can't wait to share it with all of you. Now I'm pleased to introduce Sarah Newman, our James Dicke Curator of Contemporary Art and Deputy Head Curator here at SAAM. Sarah has been with us since 2016, creating numerous exhibitions and playing a key role in the stunning reinstallation of our modern and contemporary art galleries. We have Sarah to thank for advocating for the ambitious project of acquiring Bridge and installing it in our historic Luce Foundation Center. Please join me in welcoming Sarah to the podium, and she will do the honors of introducing Glenn.
Hello, thank you so much, Jane. Hello and welcome. I'm so happy to be here tonight. It is a total pleasure and an honor to welcome Glenn Kaino to the museum. Glenn Kaino is a conceptual artist who works in Los Angeles. Beyond that, it's really, really tough to pin him down. One recent biography I read states only that his work, quote, spans an extraordinary range of media and creative activity. A slightly fuller description of Kaino's career would say that the range is part of the point. His art is constantly pushing boundaries, probing materials to see how far they can go, and bringing ideas from one discipline into another. He collaborates generously and prolifically, working with people in technology and virtual reality and biology and music and robotics and film, among other fields. Glenn is here tonight, as Jane mentioned, in part to celebrate our acquisition of Bridge, which we installed in our Luce Center this summer and is absolutely glorious. I'm so excited for you all to see it tonight if you haven't already. It's really almost impossible to believe it wasn't made for our space. And Glenn made the sculpture in collaboration with Tommie Smith. You probably know Tommie Smith. I'm sure you know Tommie Smith, who at the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City won gold in the 200-meter dash, took his position at the podium, and raised his fist for 90 seconds in silent protest. His gesture was seen around the world and instantly became an iconic image of resistance and solidarity. Bridge is a graceful, curving line made out of 200 gold-painted life casts of Smith's outstretched arm and fist. The work is a tribute to one person's action and it explores how seemingly small acts can ripple through time and alter the course of history. We'll talk more about Bridge and Glenn Kaino's other work in a moment, but before that, I want to join Jane in welcoming the very special guests we have tonight, Tommie Smith and Luce Smith. It's really, really a thrill to have you here. Thank you for everything. And with that, I would like to welcome Glenn Kaino to the stage.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is my mic working? I always have to check. Great, thank you. So I guess I want to start. I mentioned a million access points to talk about your work. You've done so many collaborations. You work in so many different fields. You're so interdisciplinary. So there's so many different points of entry. But the one I didn't mention and that I would like to talk about first is magic. Because magic has been, I think, a touchstone for you, right, in your career, especially early on in your career. Right now I'm showing a portrait that you made of the magician Ricky Jay out of playing cards, which is an optical illusion. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about magic and why you're so invested in magic.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Sarah. What an amazing, surreal opportunity to be here. When you called years ago to imagine this night was something that was really not so far off, and so I'm grateful for everyone and for SAAM. And I, to the point about all the different types of work, I say I use art and the systems and ideas and opportunities afforded by art to put together people, places, and things that don't normally have a chance to connect. Art is a space of abstraction, a space of imagination. It's not a space for auction houses. It's not a space for, it is for some people. But for me, it's a space of experimentation and a space where we don't need to have legible pathways or bridges to connect people. And particularly for magic, I would say the story is that in 2009, I was at an art fair called Art Basel Miami that some people might have heard about. And I had sold work at the fair for years, but I had never attended, and my gallerist at the time was like, you should go. And I was like, I should not go. And he said, no, you should go. And it was 2008, and I should not have gone. But I went, and it was miserable. And if you were there in 2008, sorry, we were all miserable together. And I got on the plane on the way back home, and I told my gallerist, Christian, they said, I quit. He said, what do you mean? I said, I didn't get into art for this. I didn't get into art for upset collectors and bankers and blah, blah, blah. And, I got into art because I believe that art has meaning, and I want to figure out and learn how to believe again. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to shut down my studio and hang out with magicians. And he said, that sounds fantastic. And the first thing I did was I went to the magic shop by my old studio, and I bought, magic tricks. And by the point of purchase display, there was a card, Japanese magician, and it said Magic Dojo. And I said, I'm going to do this, And so I called the guy, and I said, can I learn magic from you? And he says, no. And I said, why? He says, I only teach professional magicians. I said, well, I'm a professional artist, And I convinced him, I had to interview, but I convinced him to take me on as a student. And the first thing he did the first day is he took a coin, and he vanished it. I'm doing it horribly because I'm holding a mic. He vanished the coin, and it was a very beautiful small piece. And he said, take this coin home and learn how to hold it tonight for 1,000 times, and come back tomorrow, and I'll teach you how to vanish it. And I said, first of all, it was like Karate Kid, so I was like, I'm in. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm in. And I said, but I'm always going to ask you why, because I told you I'd be a good student, but I'm going to ask you why. And he said, Glenn, because when you're on stage and you make a coin disappear, you have to believe that it's dissolving in thin air. Because if you don't believe the most, nobody in front of you is going to believe more than you. We just showed you some fiberglass sculptures that we say is a resonation on the history of our country, the sacrifice that Tommie Smith made for all of us. And if we don't believe the most, no one's going to believe more than us. And as conceptual artists, it goes back to Duchamp, it goes back to the lineage of what makes art work. So that's why I was interested in art.
Well, I think there's two things there. There's one of them is your ability to convince people of things that they don't want to do, which seems to be a theme in your career. And then the other thing is just, I mean, as I told you, I'm doing a project with the artist Nick Cave, and I think about he talks about his first kind of creative impulse, which was watching his mother turn a sock into a puppet. So it's this kind of like primal act of creativity, you know, where you just believe that something has transformed, and you have to have that belief, and that is there is a sort of faith or a magic in art in that way.
Yeah, that's why, I mean, so I've gone on after that to go work with Ricky J, and I produced a project that is online with a collaborator of mine named Derek Delgadio called In and of Itself, and you should watch on Hulu if you have Hulu. But I think that a lot of that has to do with, you know, again, creating moments and opportunity to suggest things to people in the moment of belief. You know, so this is Ricky J was he's a very famous magician. He passed away, but one of the things he was known for is throwing cards and, you know, cutting watermelons and sticking them to the wall. And so I was at my studio and I made this portrait, you know, secretly. It was just like, oh, I wonder if that will work. And another magician had visited, and I was working with, and I found out later that, and Ricky is notoriously grumpy, and I had not met Ricky J at this point. So I found out at a party, this other magician who was a junior magician, not really high up on the magician totem pole, he was bragging about the portrait at this party, and then Ricky's people called me up and said, hey, I heard you have this portrait of me at their gallery, you know. And I was like, no, this is like a private thing. No one's ever supposed to see the secret, non-shellable portrait of Ricky J. So then Ricky wrote me a pen pal note, because we were pen pals for about a year and a half before. He was like, I secretly like it. I was like, oh, okay. So I can show it then? And so, yeah, so now it's acquired by the Hammer Museum.
Ourselves. So this is another work that I'd love to hear you to talk about, because it to me this also kind of has this sense of magic to it and transformation in the most kind of surprising way.
Yeah. So what you're looking at, this piece is about. Well, I usually start my talks with this piece. What you're looking at this piece starts out. Oh. Not a magic trick. I was just like, do we have to evacuate? That's the only thing. No. So the work starts out as an all-white American flag that I tie-dye using a recreation of a Confederate-era tarring solution. And in full explanation, it is not tar and feathering tar. It is more viscous tar. It's for waterproofing, right? But it's the same era. And if you don't know, if you know the warning, you're not supposed to put an oily rag in a bucket. Otherwise, it will light itself on fire. It's called an exothermic reaction. When the molecules go into the air and aerosol, they bounce and create heat, and eventually they will light itself on fire. And it's a problem, which is why studios catch on fire and old houses, and when they clean same with the oil. In the studio, we do that on purpose. So I tie-dye the flag with the oil solution and leave it in the corner of the studio. And between 2.5 to 3.5 hours, the flags light themselves on fire. I don't touch them. I sit there and watch them, but I don't touch them. And once they start to burn, my artistic gesture is putting the fire out. Because there's a whole history of flag burning, but not one of flag extinguishing, right? But what you see is when we show it in the museum, there's a light that shines through the flag and casts the pristine shadow of the flag on the wall. Right. And I use it as an idea that this is a marker of our moment, right? Despite the charred exterior of what we might have in terms of an external conflict, there's a value system that we hope to have dear and is embedded within us. So the optical principle definitely comes from years of work of magic. So.
There's something so optimistic in that idea, which I think is another theme that runs through your work. And I love the idea that the materials have their own kind of logic and their own sense of what they want to do. They want to light themselves on fire, and they want to be whole in the illusion. There is something really wonderful about that.
Yeah. Thank you. That's the best someone's ever said about that. So, yeah.
That's something that sort of strikes me in this work as well. Tank. Oop.
Yeah, so this work started out, this is like the end product of a longer story. It started out, well, the US military has been dumping tanks into the middle of the ocean for decades now, as a means of sort of erasing the detritus of war. You might have seen photos in some research or PBS special. But they create artificial reefs with them. And when they first started doing it, I became aware of it, and as someone who's been invested in sort of climate change and dumping tanks into the ocean was curious to me. And so they were doing testing for 5 or 8 years. They called it an eco-net positive, because after a while, barnacles and corals and not tropical corals, but fish would inhabit the carcasses of these old war machines. And this was really early internet. I was like writing letters to the government, and I was getting slides back with yellow manila envelopes with the reference photos and the research of their climate activities. And on occasion, I get a call from a curator, and I can only say it happened twice because it happened once here, and we're sitting here as a byproduct of another call from a curator that says, the call goes something like this, like, do you have an impossible project that may or may not work that you can't afford to make that you'd like to show in a venue somewhere? And I'm like, yes. And so I showed.
I've never made a call like that.
No. Those are good calls to get, though. I got a few. And I showed the curator that slide, and I said, I'd like to do something. And so what she did was, her name's Stacy Switzer, she funded, their organization funded me to rent an M60 tank, and I cast it into 17 different pieces, and I traveled around the country, and I built a coral reef lab with the best scientists in the world who invested in climate change, but also art. And we built not only these tanks that were displayed in, but we grew corals on them for 2 years. And because for me, it was like, wow, the smallest organisms of the world are reclaiming the instruments of displacement of some of the largest, right? That was like a poetic paradox to me. Well, this is the final fast forward to the end, after we found that corals, after they grow and they touch each other, they actually fight at the borders. They sting each other with tentacles, chemical warfare, and mechanical, effectively missiles. They're tentacles, right? But they look like missiles as they're shooting, right? And if you look at this final slide, this is the hatch, right, where a soldier would presumably get into the tank. It's like Africa there, a little Greece, a little, and you go, okay, so beneath the ocean surface, outside of our view, non-intelligent actors create colonial nation states that look very similar to our geographic formations, that fight at the borders for sovereignty, but they don't have any intelligence, right? And so for me, it's like Hobbes' Leviathan. It was called. So when we write about the work and we create, about the work, and we're like, okay, so these are. For me, it was, I guess to sum it up, it was like the idea that peace is not something that you just get by stopping war. And a lot of people say stop war, thinking that means have peace. But for me, and this is my proof, that you have to invest in peace. Peace comes at a loss. Like, we have to give. We have to give to other humans. We have to give to other people. And it is the process of making that effort that is not going to be remunerated by fairness. Like, fairness doesn't have a part in peace. Overgiving does, because we're never going to see each other eye to eye. But if we overgive, then we will figure out how to meet in the middle. But that's sort of like what's this.
It's also about this kind of the sense of things, a world that we don't understand, that forces that are kind of greater than us having their own logic again and working out, which is so much at play in Bridge. We've spoken about this. This is just such a thrilling moment for me, because I first saw Bridge 10 years ago. I saw it in a festival in Southeast DC, and I just was in awe of it. I couldn't stop thinking about it at the time. I loved the way people responded to it. When I first saw it, I approached it, and I sort of I knew your work a little bit, and I knew who I was going to see, but I didn't know what the work was. And at first I thought maybe, is this a dinosaur skeleton, or is this a DNA molecule? What is this? And then I got close to it, and I said, it's a human. and then I thought, I know what this is. I know who this is. And there was this kind of, process of discovery that you could see people engage in at the time, and people kind of like getting very emotional when they realized what this was about. And this was about a specific person, a specific moment in time, and the consequences of that action. And so, I kept thinking about the work, and in 2020, during the pandemic and during, after George Floyd, and I just kept coming back to this work, and it just was like lodged in my brain. I kept thinking about the work, and I kept thinking about Tommie Smith and what your gesture did and how it inspired so many people. So yes, so that's my story with Bridge. So I feel really, so gratified to have it be here in this place. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your history with Bridge and with Tommie Smith?
Yeah, well, many of you saw the film last night, so I'll try to dig into some deep cuts that weren't in the film. But I'd say I think that well, formally, just as we're talking about the piece, and as you see installed, I don't know if you've seen it yet. It's a really remarkable installation. I've had the opportunity to do shows in a lot of different museums. This is the rare case, or one of the rare cases, where the artwork absolutely 100% matches and is a fit for the museum. So again, it is with a tremendous gratitude that we're all sitting here. I'll share a funny story about my parents too. It's like when I had my first show, it was a really big gallery in LA, and years ago, I was it was the year 2000 maybe, and I was in art magazines and this, that, the other, and my parents don't really know many art magazines or whatever, I had a show listing, not even a review, but a listing, Glenn Kaino, on Friday, in Sunset Magazine, and I remember my dad calling up and said, "That's a big magazine," and I was like, "That's so awesome." So I've had it, only to say the corollary is I've had shows in a lot of different museums. It's great. The Smithsonian is a grand place for us, and it has been on the vision board of Tommie, myself, Rachel, Efsheen, our team. For us to all be here is really great, and so. To talk formally, one of the ideas of the piece was, though, that the scale is perfect for the space, right? So when you walk in and see it, like you said, you see, it is open to interpretation of what you see: a runway, a bridge, a ripple, a wave, a dinosaur, a harp, an instrument. It is an instrument in a lot of ways. And then as you get closer, it dynamically actually changes as the scale resolves, and you see it to be an arm, and you see the other arms, and you see the idea of people behind Tommie, people in front of Tommie. We've talked about it as a bridge to the past, a bridge to the future. It's a signature, it's an implication, it's the runways, it's the ups and downs of Tommie's life. And I also like to say that I make art because I can't write about everything. I can certainly yap about a lot of it, but if I could write about it all, we would just write. But the idea of opening up the interpretation of it, like Tommie did with No Words, allows for the audience to come in and bring something else to it as well. And so it is with a lot of gratitude that we sit here with that.
Can you just, because it's such a good story and because not everyone has heard it, can you talk a little bit? Yeah, okay. How did you first come to know Tommie, and why were you so interested in him in the first place?
Okay, so if you didn't see the film, and if you saw it, I'll try to flip it up a little bit too. So I had that photo that Sarah showed with Tommie, the black and white photo on the taped to the corner of my iMac, and years ago. And a friend of mine, Michael Jonte, came into the studio, pointed at the image, and said, "Oh, Coach Smith, you want to meet him?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" Because I got it from some book, and I had seen it in high school, and it was a symbol to me, and had no idea anything about, and I'm still from the generation where it's like, "Oh, that's a black and whitey photo. Is that person still alive?" I have no idea, And Michael was like, "Coach Smith," but I was like, "Oh, coach is only the name you call someone who has coached you. So he must have a personal relationship." And so he walks to the corner of the studio and he texts somebody, and he comes back a few minutes later and he says, "They want to meet you." I'm like, "Yeah, no, they don't." And they did. So I thought, and they did. And I booked 2 tickets on Expedia, right there. And it was like a Tuesday. By Friday, I'm at the house, walking up with Michael. And Tommie shakes my hand with the hand, his hand with the arm. I'm like, good to meet you, sir. Well, first of all, he hugs Michael. Michael was one of his track runners. And he's like, this is Glenn. And then he's like, oh, okay. Shakes my hand, sits me on the couch, and plays the race like in slow motion. And it's like and starts narrating the race to me, and I'm sitting there literally with chills on this couch. I can't even believe I'm here, like right now. And then, as the story goes, Delois, who's the rock for all of us, Delois, his wife and manager, cut him off and said, "Tommie, shut up. Glenn, why are you here?" Tommie will talk all night long if you let him, but we need to know why you're here. And I was like, hey, I'm a conceptual artist. I didn't prepare a pitch. Michael was like, let's go meet Tommie Smith. I was like, yeah. But in his house, as you might have seen, or you should know, like there's hundreds of photos of the salute, predictably, and they're amazing. And it's like, you think that you saw a cool autograph and a letter to Tommie, and then the cooler one's next to it. It's really like remarkable. And so I said, it strikes me that you live in a bit of a time bubble. And he said, what does that? They said, what does that mean? I said, I was born after that happened, so for me, it's just the photo on my screen. But you, brush your teeth today with that arm, and you drive with that arm, and you shook my hand with that hand, it's like that's like it's personal. And what I didn't say yesterday is that Tommie is the only person in the world who saw that salute from the inside out. Okay, so and I thought that I said, wow, like you've never seen that salute. You've never even seen that arm from the outside in, So I said, what if we could collaborate on a project, anything that functions now, allowing you to be witness to this rich history and to see the salute from the outside in, because we've all had the blessing of that, and you could just sense that. And Delois had made, some remarks to me about legacy, and I was just talking earlier about trust. Trust building is a big part of my practice, and who I am, and so I was like, we're off to the races. So I said, okay, I have an idea. I'm going to take you to LA, and I'm going to take the arm off your body. And he's like, what are you talking about? You're going to cut off my arm? I was like, no. I'm going to cast it. I'm going to make a cast of the arm. And so we took him. We flew him to LA, and there's this shot of us mugging together. I was like, our mug shot when we first cast Tommie's arm. And we were off to the races. And then, the other bit is like I went to the toy store and I bought every action figure that had like a closed fist, right? Because I was like, oh, there's got to be a G.I. Joe or whatever. Let me tell you what, Kung Fu grips don't have fists. They have like the dolls these days all have this. So there was like one Aquaman doll that had a fist. And so I bought like a bunch, and then I cast a bunch of tiny Aquaman dolls, and I made about 1,000, 2,000 little tiny, plastic Aquaman arms. And I was like, I gotta, this is like an icon, And I was like, tree, no, and finally I was thinking about the poetics of it and connecting people and connecting things, and I was like, a bridge, So I literally got some string, I made a mini version of the bridge, just really janky, and I called down. I think I got it. We're gonna make a bridge, and so so from the janky little toys, and then to Nick's point, when I was younger, we used to make our own toys and had a good time using cardboard, and we had a really good friend that was like my inspiration to help teach us how to make toys, and so and then years later, the help of curators and museums, and the process of what you see. I'll say this so you have a greater appreciation of what it is, besides like, oh shit, is that like when we started, we could only afford like 6 arms. and we had the vision. I have the model to prove it. I have a model of 200 arms, but we could like, it was like, yeah, it costs what to make what? And so we made 6, and then it's not Joy Simmons, who's a big supporter here. Joy was one of our first supporters. So this is a Smithsonian family reunion. Joy acquired the first one and helped us fund to make like 12, and then Shimmy Moment and Expo Chicago, we showed like, I don't know, 18, 20, And then Tommie and I rolled up in suits to the Expo Chicago like it was a big group show. We showed up to Expo Chicago like it was a group show. Like, oh, we're the centerpiece of this big group show. And showed that. And then we, Thelma Golden Studio Museum, we ended up showing 36 arms, and they funded us to make a few more arms. And then you name it, over the course of many museums, and benefactors, we were able to extend it until we finally got the funding with the show in DC that you saw, to have the first big presentation of it. And the last thing about the sports thing and that presentation at the Tingy building in the shipyard was the lighting on that photo is really great. And Afshin, but also like all my cinema photographer friends who have seen that photo is like, how did you pay for the lighting for that? Because that's a lot of light. And I was like, oh, it's amazing. I had one of my installers at the time, I had him put an iPhone on a stand, and he took a shot every 2 minutes for the whole day. And I scrolled through the whole day, and I figured out the sun came up and down, and there was a moment where the sun actually went through the lights of the baseball stadium. And the baseball stadium lights diffused the sun to the exact point where it created this line that blazed onto the bridge, and it was 452, and so I bracketed and I took 100 shots with the high-res camera from 452 to 453, and we ended up getting that shot. But the last little bit too, for the full circle moment, is that when we were first designing that, I get the floor plan, and I brought my daughter Sadie, who's here, I brought her to the site visit. We're looking through, we're walking through the dirt, and I was like, oh, I'm pointing that at the White House and the Smithsonian because we're gonna get there. And that piece is actually angled so that it points here. So just to say manifesting.
I know we could talk all night about this work, and I would be happy
table
to. But before we do wrap up, and I want to take a few questions also, but I want you to talk a little bit about DC, because this is a DC audience, and Tommie's interest in DC, and your connection with Secretary Bunch and President Obama.
Oh yeah, okay. So we're doing a road show. This is it. You're gonna get all the cuts. No, so when we started working together, Delois, again, I had my only intention was to be in service, really, and that it was trying to figure out what was. And so Delois and I were having a conversation, and she said, what are your goals? And I said, my goals are to help. And I'll help whatever you want. And then she told me her goals, and they were like, 1, we want to meet Oprah. and 2, we want to be in the Smithsonian. Literally, that's the goals from the day one, the first week of hanging out. And then 3, we want to meet the president. It's 2015. So I've spent a lot of time with Oprah Winfrey. I worked with her for about 11 years, and I happened to have seen her 2 weeks after, I left Atlanta, and I saw Oprah, and I said, Oprah, you're not going to believe it. I'm now working with Tommie Smith, and Oprah's fantastic, as you already know, but she said, Tommie Smith, and I was like, that's amazing, and she said, I said, he'd really like to meet you, and she says, I'll meet him tomorrow, and I was like, what? Now, I spent 11 years with Oprah Winfrey. There was never a moment where she's like, I'll do something tomorrow, And so I was, I texted, I got the Delta tickets and the whole rider, and I was like, I called, I said, Tommie, I got you meeting with Oprah in the morning. And he's like, I'm too old to get on a plane right now. I was like, no, you are not. In fact, you are not. But then he passed, right? So just to be clear, today he hasn't met Oprah yet. Still working on it. Got to figure that out. But if and when, and you're in DC, so y'all probably get impossible requests all the time, maybe. If someone asks you to do impossible things and you do the first one, and they pass, you kind of think that you're off the hook for all 3. I did, because I was like, look, I got you the Oprah meeting until that happens. This other stuff is harder for me. And so Delois in the next February called up 2016 and said, hey, we want to meet the president, not the ex-president. I was like, oh my God, that's hard. You don't happen to have the photo of us together. Okay. That was my punchline ending of the whole thing. She knows the. But I ended up if you work at the White House, I'm sorry. I ended up calling the White House and calling everyone that I knew that knew President Obama, and every collector and every curator and everyone. Called Thelma Golden at the top of Aspen Ideas Fest with the Esther Gates, and Thelma was like, I can't help you. And I'm like, oh, someone help. I called every day, and finally, they said, if you can get to DC on official business, we can, work on your security and then invite you in if the president wants to see you. Tell the president you're here and invite you in. And so they didn't know that we had been in long conversations with Damien, who was here last night, and Lonnie Bunch, Secretary Bunch.
Damien Thomas from
this
the National Museum of African American History and Culture, NAMAC.
And notably, they had not gotten a gift from Tommie and Delois yet, and they really were looking for that. And so we worked together to create a package for Secretary Bunch and for Damien, and that was our access to get in here. And then they told President Obama that we were in town, and then on my birthday, they invited us in. The great part is, you'll get an extended cut from the film for those of you who saw this story last night, but it'll be a short one so you can get to dinner. But I made a drawing for President Obama of a relay race where Tommie is like passing the baton to a fourth runner, on the back, Tommie wrote this inscription. He wrote, "I can only imagine the length of passage, but most importantly, the baton has not been dropped. Congrats on a wonderful 8." And I signed it, and we gave it to the president. Yeah. So we get invited to the White House. We're sitting in the West Wing, and we're like, oh my God. And then all of a sudden, this is like the extended cut. These generals walk in, and we're like, oh man, we're going to get canceled right now because these guys don't look happy. And right, we're sitting there, we're like, we're like, oh God. And then the night before, like at 2 a.m., they were like, what's the frame made of the drawing? And I was like, oh, I called one of our old teammates, Dion. I was like, this is not happening. There's no way that someone from the White House is calling me at 2 a.m. asking me what the frame is made of. Like this is like, they're just like, So we ended up going in there and we meet, and then we left. And then 2 weeks later, or ish, President Obama gets on stage at the DNC, and he's talking to Hillary Clinton about Hillary, and he says, "And now I'm a private citizen, and I'm going to pass the baton." And so Delois calls me. We're crying on the phone. We were crying 8 minutes after we left the White House, and then we were crying again. And then in 12 speeches in the 3 weeks after we left, President Obama, even on CNN, talked about what we talked about in the Oval, which was civil rights and all of this work being a multi-generational struggle and passing the baton. And so in the film, I said, I'm not taking credit for being Obama's speechwriter, but evidentiary, if you put the pieces together, I think Tommie Smith might be credited as one of President Obama's speechwriters. One of those moments.
And I will just end by saying that there is something so remarkable about, thinking about Tommie Smith's activism and his gesture, which was so impactful, and then this work of art, which is not the opposite of that, but does something totally different than that, and sort of opens up questions and is a space for thinking about things with nuance and just asking questions. So I love the tension in that work as much as it's about a work that's about the details and the whole. It's about that kind of tension between activism and art and contemplation. So thank you for making it, and thank you for inspiring it.
And I will end by just thanking you, but also thanking Tommie and saying, the idea around the work is, the work is, as great as it is, and we're celebrating it, and it's amazing. It is far secondary to your gesture, to your sacrifice, and to what you have done. I'm gonna get emotional saying that. So thank you so much for the life on the ride.
It's such. I can't stop talking, but it's such a pleasure to be able to talk about, to talk about you when we talk about the work and to tell your story. It's just such a pleasure. probably have time for a couple of questions. I don't see a timekeeper, so someone will have to let me know.
One or two questions.
Two questions.
I'm just pointing. I have no idea what I'm doing. I should stop pointing. I got scolded on my last panel talk. They're like, stop pointing. What are you doing?
My question is, so you kept creating more and more arms. How many arms did you end up with, and how did you know you were done?
Well, Tommie won a 200-meter sprint, and his arms are roughly 1 meter long, and so we always had the vision board for a 100-foot sculpture made out of 200 arms. So that was always the goal. That was our finish line, so to speak.
Yes?
What are the arms made of?
Oh, they're fiberglass cast with a paint on top. Yeah. There's a whole weight thing. If it was bronze, it'd be like tearing down the building.
So I wanted to ask, what were you doing with Oprah for 11 years?
I helped her run a big portion of her digital media efforts. We won an Emmy together. I helped launch a bunch of projects and did a bunch of stuff. So yeah, she whatever. I just can't glaze her, but she's as good as you hope her to be. You know, very few times you see someone who's so noteworthy, and you're like, oh, and you meet them, like, she is absolutely the real deal, and I'm so grateful for that time too.
Well, one more?
Oh, no, sorry. Yeah,
Oh.
we'll wrap it up. Yeah.
Okay, we'll wrap it up. We are hungry. We will go up to, and Glenn and Tommie will be at dinner, and so we can continue the conversation. Thank you again.